There are different factors that are going to influence it. The teeth themselves are going to influence it, as well as the occlusal forces acting on the periodontium. So in health, we're going to see that the shape of the teeth is going to affect the contour of the alveolar bone. The position of the teeth. Are the teeth straight or are they misaligned? Are they in the same occlusal plane? Are some teeth just in a state of eruption? And then in turn, the shape of the teeth and the position of the teeth are going to affect the tooth contact. And then, as I mentioned, occlusal forces acting on a periodontium also affect the contour of alveolar bone. And we're going to see how that is transmitted to the bone next week when we talk more about the uh, microscopic features of alveolar bone and relate them to the clinical. So this is really in health the kind of factors that are going to determine the contour of your alveolar bone from the crest to the interdental septum. Okay, I just want you to understand though that pathologic conditions are also going to affect the contour of alveolar bone. For example, in periodontitis, there's going to be bone loss. And also trauma from occlusion. Excessive occlusal forces acting on a healthy periodontium can impact the contour of the alveolar bone. So again, I just want to reiterate that these are the factors in health that we're going to look at first. And you're going to see when I talk about the outline of the width and shape of the interdental septum, the contour of the alveolar crest, you're going to see how these things apply. The first thing I want to cover is what's known as festooning. And I know with a clean finger, or when you get into clinic this afternoon, when you're working on your partner, just stick your gloved finger in the vestibule and then just slide over the gingiva. You'll notice that there's a wavy pattern to the alveolar bone under the gingiva. And what this is, it's a wavy pattern of alveolar bone. And what you notice right here, you can see the root prominences sticking out here, alternating with depressions. So it's a wavy pattern of the alveolar bone that's related to prominences of the root showing through with depressions in between them. So this wavy pattern is referred to as festooning. And you have this picture on page 7, which we're going to be recording other information, but I just want you to see how on page 7 on the anteriors you can really see this festooning. Here's another anterior view that you can really see in the anteriors, the festooning is more prominent. And why do these root prominences show through more on the anterior? It's just that the bone is a little bit thinner in anterior regions. Just think about the anterior teeth don't have as many chewing forces acting upon them as posterior. So the bone tends to be thinner, making these root prominences more apparent and thus festooning more apparent. On page 7, if you look at the view of the posterior teeth, you can see that, where is that picture? Sorry, I thought it, oh, here on the posterior, yours is similar. I guess I didn't have the exact picture, but notice I can't see the root prominences through here as much, because in this molar area, the bone is really thick there, because it has to be withstand those forces of mastication that the molar teeth have to take when we're chewing. So it's less apparent where the bone is thicker. Okay, let's go to the top of page 6, and we'll also be looking at the picture on page 7 at the top again. Let's talk about the shape of the inner dental septum in anterior teeth. So I'm going to draw completely the inner dental septum between these central incisors. And I want you to notice that it has a conical shape. So the inner dental septum of anterior teeth tends to have this conical shape. With posterior teeth, again, I'm going to draw the inner dental septum completely. You know, this is, if I go all the way up, I have to estimate where the tooth roots, and I may have extended beyond a little, probably. But notice I have, it's rectangular shaped or box shaped. And here's where that contour of the CEJ and the contact between teeth play a role in determining this. If you just look at this picture, I don't have it in your packet, you already know from the incisors, the CEJ is scalloped and it goes more coronally on anterior teeth, whereas here this shows a premolar or the posterior tooth. It's straighter. It does not go down more coronally. So I think on this lateral view, you can see how the inner dental septum has that conical shape in picture A. And in picture B, it has more of that rectangular appearance. Also, if you notice that the contact area, this is, facial, this is lingual. Notice on the anterior tooth, it's not as broad. If I go to a premolar, it becomes broader, and then on a molar, it's even broader. So this is just illustrating how the shape of the teeth, including the CEJ outline and the tooth contact, impacts the shape of the inner dental septum. On anterior, it's more conical. On posterior, it's more box shaped. So here, if you just go to this picture again, and I outline, here's my CEJ, notice how it comes up more coronally, and the bone follows that, just like the gingiva does, the free gingival margin, which isn't shown here. And then if I look at the posterior, the CEJ is straighter. It doesn't come up as coronally, making this more of a box shape rather than conical shape. So that's just in general in health, relating the shape of the teeth, including the CEJ outline and the tooth contact. And then the positioning of the teeth will affect that a little bit too. Okay, let's look at how wide the inner dental septum is. Okay, A1 shows you a posterior tooth. A2 shows you an anterior tooth. Notice how the inner dental septum is wider with the posterior tooth and narrower with the anterior tooth. And that's because there's an inverse relationship between the contact areas. Notice on the posterior tooth in a occlusal to apical direction. Let me just notice this is a lesser contact right there than this one right here. Or I can say that these molar surfaces are more contoured compared to these surfaces right here. So the lesser the contact in that occlusal to apical direction, or the more contoured the enamel surfaces are, the broader the interdental septum. It's wider. Look at that. It's wider there. In contrast, where I have this greater contact in an occlusal to apical direction, there's a longer contact there. The interdental septum is going to be narrower. It's not as wide. So look how narrow that is in this area. And if we go to these pictures here, we can kind of, these are different magnifications. That's why it may not look that way, but this is narrower in here and wider in here. Or more importantly, if we look at an X-ray, this was shown under the lamina dura section. Notice that the interdental septa of this anterior area aren't that wide here.
Sorry, can you go back to the slide of the width? I wasn't finished reading.
Yeah, I'm just gonna finish this a minute, then I will. Okay, and then I wanted you to see on the posterior one, look how the interdental septum is wider compared to the anterior teeth. Okay, so let me just, right here?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I was just showing that to you on the actual skull and then on the X-ray. Okay, let's talk more about this alveolar crest in the especially in the interdental septum. Again, I'm taking this illustration that's on the top of page 7, and previously I had outlined the CEJ there. Okay, and then here I just want to outline a couple CEJs over here. Do you notice that the crest is apical to the CEJ? Okay, it's always going to be apical to the CEJ, even in health. So here's the crest here. Here's the crest right here. So what is that normal height? What is that normal height? In health, the alveolar crest is going to be 1 to 2 millimeters apical to the CEJ. That's just the opposite of the gingival margin. Now, there's no gingiva here, but just remember the gingiva is going to be 1 to 2 millimeters coronal to the CEJ, like this. So the alveolar crest is just the opposite. This is something that, you're going to remember and apply to your radiographic interpretation or assessment all the time throughout school and as your career in the real world as a dental hygienist. This is a piece of information you have to retain and apply, not just memorize for a test.
So what did you say the red was?
That was just showing you if the gingiva were covering it. Remember the GM or the free gingival margin is positioned 1 to 2 millimeters coronal to the CEJ in health.
Oh, okay.
So showing you how that would be coronal to the CEJ, while the blue line is the alveolar crest, which is apical. Also notice how it follows the outline of the CEJ, just like the free gingiva does. Do you see how, if we look at the alveolar crest on the anterior, do you see how it's scalloped there? And it is slightly scalloped in the posterior. So in general, the general contour is it's scalloped following the outline of the CEJ. So the word to plug in there is scalloped. And which area is it more scalloped? In the anterior, because again, that relates to how the CEJ is more scalloped on anterior teeth than posterior teeth. But just in general, we can say the alveolar crest is scalloped. Okay, now we're going to zero in on the crest that's right in the interdental septum area. That crest that's right in that interdental septum area. Okay, so I'm sorry, on the bottom of page 6, I was going to reinsert this diagram again, but you have it. If you go back to where you have the picture for the interdental septum, I want to point out some important concepts. Okay, on this diagram, in the interdental septum, just like everywhere, the alveolar crest is going to be 1 to 2 millimeters apical to the CEJ. So right where the blue line is, again, that shows you there's alveolar crest. The green line shows the CEJ, so it's going to be 1 to 2 millimeters apical to the CEJ. I want you to notice here as well that when I draw an imaginary line, the green line between the CEJs of adjacent teeth, and then draw the alveolar crest line, those two lines should be parallel. So that crest is going to be parallel to the imaginary line drawn between the CEJs of 2 adjacent teeth. And then again, this picture reviews how the gingival crest, shown in red, is 1 to 2 millimeters coronal to the CEJ in health. Can everybody see how if I have that imaginary line between the CEJs, it's parallel to the crest on this particular diagram? So let's, on page 7, there's this illustration right here. And then I'm going to look at A first, and what I'm doing in all these pictures. And then I'm going to look at B. So what I'm doing is outlining the crest. So in B1 and B3, I'm outlining the crest. And then if we look in C2, I'm outlining the crest. Okay, in all these pictures, the crest is 1 to 2 millimeters apical to the CEJ. But I want you to see how the contour can vary depending upon the position of the teeth or the alignment of the teeth. Here's the occlusal plane for this tooth, but here's the occlusal plane for this tooth. And same here, this occlusal plane is, this tooth is up higher than this tooth. Picture C shows us mesial drifting of teeth. C2 shows us mesial drifting. I want to show you that in all these pictures, even though the crest contour is a little different, they're all healthy situations. Okay, now remember in a posterior, the interdental septum is going to be a little wider. So here we see the contour is evenly rounded. And an anterior tooth is shown here. We know that interdental septum is narrower and the CEJ comes up higher. So this is evenly pointed. But what I want to point out is that when I draw that imaginary line between the CEJs, try to draw this one a little better. Do you see how they are parallel? Even though this is evenly rounded, this one's evenly pointed. So it follows that rule, being parallel to the imaginary line. Now let's look at B1. This tooth right here is not as erupted as the adjacent tooth. But if I draw an imaginary line between the CEJs, notice that that's still parallel to the alveolar crest. So what you have to be careful with on radiographs is that you don't misinterpret a slant for bone loss. You have to picture that imaginary line. Same with this side. This tooth is a little more erupted than the two teeth in occlusion. If I draw that imaginary line between the CEJs, look how that's still parallel. So there's no bone loss there either. With the mesial drift, here's the CEJ of this tooth, CEJ of this tooth. If I draw that imaginary line, again, the crest is parallel and there's no bone loss, even though it has that slanted appearance. So let's go ahead and actually look at some of the x-rays. So let's, if we take this x-ray, which was shown under the lamina dura section of the outline, there's the alveolar crest. And then if I put the CEJ in, notice that it's parallel to the imaginary line and it's 1 to 2 millimeters, not more than 1 to 2 millimeters apical. So in this patient there has not been bone loss. That's healthy. Or if I actually just take this, if I note the CEJ, I guess mine's a little, need to lower that pink line a little. And that's the CEJ, and then here's the alveolar crest. You can see that's 1 to 2 millimeters apical. On this x-ray, I want you to see that, notice that here the CEJ, the imaginary line, is slanted and the crest is a little slanted, whereas between these two molars, the crest is straighter, but the teeth are more evenly erupted. Does everybody see how there's no bone loss there because I've applied those rules, 1 to 2 millimeters apical and parallel to that imaginary line. Again, I just want to point out that here, the crest is a little bit more evenly pointed on the anterior, and on the posterior, it's more evenly rounded. So I can have an evenly rounded and evenly pointed and a slanted crest, and it still can be healthy. If we look at this patient with some major radiographic bone loss, I think you can see, again, there's the alveolar crest, look where the CEJ is. That's more than 1 to 2 millimeters apical. It's still pretty parallel. The crest is parallel to the CEJ, but it's beyond 1 to 2 millimeters. And you're going to learn how to assess that there's been some horizontal bone loss. And then you're going to learn about vertical bone loss. Like here's a slanted crest. That's not parallel to the CEJ there. Okay. And so then based on the amount of radiographic bone loss and whether or not there's missing teeth in the dentition, you're going to determine the periodontal stage for the patient. But, that's going beyond that's next semester. But I just want to reiterate how important it is for you to know the height and the contour of that alveolar crest in the interdental septum. Okay, and then again, we already looked at the furcation involvement in the interradicular septum. Okay, so let's wrap up here. So I still just need 2 people to officially, we are going to have the midterm next week. It's not, like I said, it's going to be between 9 and 11 next Tuesday. And I still need 2 people to just respond to the email to vote in writing. I originally tried to keep it off the reading day, but with your work schedules, I can't interfere with that. So it's going to be next Tuesday, but I do need everyone in writing to say that they're voting for that. So, all right. And
So for page 6, when it says general contour, I didn't get that fill in the blank.
okay. Oh, I had just said it on the one slide. I'll go back to it. I'll show you.
Okay.
So it was just saying that it's scalloped, but I showed it with this picture while it was up. So in the height is always in health is going to be 1 to 2 millimeters apical, and the contour outline is going to be scalloped following the CEJ. So again, the green shows us the CEJ scalloping on the anterior, and on the right, on the posterior, it's not quite as scalloped there, but it is a little bit scalloped if you follow that around there. Which I wasn't on the CEJ, sorry, right there. So the bone height's going to be is going to follow that CEJ as well and have a scalloped outline. So I said that for this slide so that you could see that the bone is scalloped more so on the anterior. Okay, so the general contour is it's scalloped. As shown with these pictures. More so on the anterior. And then the contour in the interdental septum is where this information applies, that it's parallel to that imaginary line drawn between the CEJs. Okay? Is that?
Thank you.
Sure. All right then. I'll see you tomorrow at 12:30.